Our guest this week for Touch Bass and Soul is Korean-American violinist Jennifer KOH, whose project Alone Together was awarded a Grammy in April for Best Classical Instrumental Solo. It was a project created in response to the COVID-19 pandemic and the hardships faced by artists, bringing together 39 original works by established and emerging composers. I'm delighted to say that she joins us via video now from the US to tell us more about the project and her career. Ms. KOH, hello, and thank you for connecting with us today.
Hello. Thank you for having me on your show.
Well, first, congratulations on winning the Grammy for such an interesting project as well. Can you first tell us a bit more about the project in your own words? How did it come about and what were you aiming to do?
It's funny because being a freelance violinist, as soon as the shelter-in-place order happened, I remembered that every half hour, all of my concerts canceled. So of course, my first reaction was panic for myself. But then after that, I realized that it was much worse for others. And I think one of the advantages of maybe being a musician is we always have to imagine the end of a work before we actually start the beginning. So I realized there would always be an end to the pandemic. And I wanted to be able to look back and, I could have either been scared the entire time or only worried about myself, or I could have the ability to look back and know that I helped other people. And that was important to me. So within a few days of the shelter-in-place order being issued in New York City, I started working on this project and raised funds very much at the last minute. And it was really, in the end, it was an honor to be able to be part of this community of artists that really care about each other. The kind of mentor artists recommended younger musicians that they knew were freelance. And these are wonderful composers that have won the Pulitzer Prize, the MacArthur Genius Award, Grammy, every possible kind of honor. And they, really cared about the future of music, whether we would lose the next generation of artists. So I guess in a sense, being able to have this opportunity to record their works and bring them more exposure, the Grammy did that even more. So I'm really grateful to also bring attention to the entire artistic community.
So it seemed at the early stage of the pandemic, you perhaps realized the severity of the situation and you mobilized to put this project together. So amid this difficult and challenging time, this amazing work came out. Was there a remit or perhaps a theme or instruction when you asked the composers to write something? And were the works that you received what you expected?
I think in the very beginning, I had to make a decision whether we would fund just a few composers for much longer works, which would end up giving them more funding, or whether we would help as many people as possible with a smaller amount. So essentially, we did micro commissions. The commission instruction was 30-second works for solo violin, which was I recorded from my apartment. I'd not really used the camera function on my phone before. And I remembered I was just balancing against some books, and then we would go on a live stream. But that was the beginning of the pandemic. Everything looked really not very well put together. But in any case, I don't think I realized this at the time, but I think the entire project became an archive, a musical archive and journey of of the pandemic. In New York City, as many people know, was horrific in March and April of 2020. And in many of the works, because these are, a lot of them were composers in New York, you can just hear sirens running throughout their
Right.
pieces. But I think the pieces encapsulate all of our kind of experiences, everything from isolation and loneliness to, hope, to horror and dismay, to comfort and looking towards those we love
Sure.
for comfort.
We have spoken to several musicians on this segment over the past 2 years about how difficult the pandemic has been for them. So I'm sure all the musicians who took part would have very much appreciated what you did and the recognition this work received. How did it feel to win the Grammy? I understand you were actually nominated for a Grammy before, back in 2009 as well, in the Best Chamber Music Performance category. But I'm sure this time it would have been perhaps, of course, it would have been meaningful to win, but it might have been even more meaningful in that it was for such a personal and meaningful work.
I mean, I didn't expect to win at all. And just a few minutes before, some of my colleagues sitting next to me were like, maybe you should prepare something in case you do win, because you should say something. And suddenly I got very nervous, more nervous about actually speaking than about not winning. And yes, so it was a surprise, and I was just happy to be able to be part of this community. I was happy that the majority of composers and musicians on the album are people of color and women. So I was also thrilled that the Recording Academy and all of our fellow musicians really acknowledged that we were part of classical music.
You are now a Grammy Award winning artist, but it's interesting to think that actually I read you began the violin by chance at a young age because there were no openings for other instruments at a program that you were enlisted in.
Yes, I mean, as you know, I'm sure everybody in Korea has had this experience. My parents were both born and were children during the war, so they did not have the opportunity to ever learn a musical instrument. And I think when they came to the United States and had me, they wanted me to have every opportunity that they didn't have. So they basically just went to all the different little schools for kids, whether it was ice skating or swimming or ballet or gymnastics, and then music just happened to be another thing. But I was very lucky. I had a wonderful teacher, my first violin teacher, and she's really the one who guided me to my next teachers. And so I've been very fortunate to have wonderful mentors. And now that I feel like that is really important for me to do for the next generation of musicians, because
Well,
I was given that.
you say fortunate, but it seemed you were very talented as well, even at a young age. By the age of 11, you'd made your debut with the Chicago Symphony Orchestra, and then you went on to win the Tchaikovsky International Violin Competition in 1994 as well. Do you ever think what would have happened if you'd played a different instrument? Was it the violin that you think that you connected with, or was it music in general?
I think it was music in general. I think I always knew I wanted music in my life. I didn't really realize I didn't think I could be a professional musician, even after I graduated from school. But my mentors believed in me. And so I almost continued because of out of respect to them. I felt that I had to continue. It's not easy being a musician, which was also a reason that I really wanted to put together this project alone together, because it's not, unless you really love it,
Mm.
one should go into a different field.
And let's talk about another fascinating project that you are involved in. It's called Everything Rises. It's a collaborative project with the opera bass-baritone singer Davone Tines. It premiered in April. It's a show mixing theatre and music, and it delves into both your experiences as people of colour in the field of classical music, as well as for Davone Tines, his experiences as a gay man in the industry as well. Can you tell us more about this project?
I think this project is really about acknowledging, and this has to do, I think, a bit with the ideas of colonialism, and how people of color engage with music, in classical music, which is a very Western art form. And for me, it was really important to bring forward my mother's story, and her experiences as a child in Korea, her experiences of being an immigrant in America, and everything that she had been able to do in her life. It was an opportunity to honor her, and to really show the kind of strength of our ancestors. Davone Tines is a Black American man, and that, I think, well, I think 3 days ago was the an anniversary for the riots in Los Angeles after the beating of Rodney King. And so we also wanted to show, I think there's been a long history of Afro and Asian alliance in the United States. And I think also with rising violence against Asian Americans, putting or coming together as minorities in the West is
Hmm.
important. So, and it was such a meaningful experience, I must say. One of the most meaningful things I've done in my life,
I
because
understand.
it was really about being truth telling.
I
Yeah,
understand you spent several years putting it together. What was the
6 years.
reaction like? 6 years in all.
Yes, I mean, backstage, Devon and I couldn't believe it was actually happening, because, of course, there was postponement for 2 years due to the pandemic. So we had been working 4 years prior to building it, and it was. I mean, it's hard for me to describe it, because it is music, of course. It engages with Devon's grandmother.
Hmm.
There's a lot of violence, acknowledging the violence that our families have experienced. His great grandmother was born a slave, and there have been family members that have been lynched, and yet he was able to, because of his family's strength, he was able to go to Harvard and graduate from Harvard and Juilliard.
Hmm.
And because of my mother's strength and my family strength, I was able to become the musician I am. My mom actually is received her PhD. I never did, so I used to feel like I had lowered the education level of my family, but I'm lucky enough to be receiving an honorary doctorate. So I asked my mom if that's the same, and she said, "Yeah, okay." uh, at least you now have a doctorate, even though it's an honorary one. But both my parents are excited. So I totally forgot the question you actually asked. Sorry.
No, sure. I'm just wondering what the reaction to that work was like as well, to Everything Rises.
I think that a lot of people, I think it was an opportunity for people to really think about the complexity of individuals that they might see just walking down the street,
Hmm.
even, and the richness of the history and family that created that person. And I think for both Davone and I, because we are, in a sense, I mean, classical music is not the most popular thing in the world, but within classical music, at least, we're more public figures.
Sure.
Um, and so to be able to really open ourselves, I think, was very scary. And we felt both very vulnerable.
Mm.
But I think by doing it together, we were able to really tell the truth to people. So I think people responded to that. It's not always easy or simple.
Mm.
It's
Sure.
complicated.
Finally, what's next for you? It seems to me that you are someone who's looking to push the boundaries of the classical music world, challenging the audience and the industry as well. Would you say that is something that you aim to do?
I think that it's important to include people and voices that have not been heard in classical music. I think it's important to be able to represent Asian Americans, Koreans, and our story on stage. Koreans have been within classical music for quite a while as performers, but we've never had our story presented on stage, on a classical music stage before. So it was an honor to be able to do that. I hope that I'm only the first of many Korean Americans and Asian Americans to bring their stories forward in classical music. And then just in terms of other things, I suppose in a more traditional way, I guess I played at Carnegie the week before the Grammys, and I'll be doing the proms, the BBC proms this summer. I'm sorry, I'm really horrible about remembering all of
No,
my
no.
engagements. So I'm trying to think what else I'm doing in the future. Like,
Well,
very quickly, and I'm spacing out.
no worries. It's been an absolute pleasure and honor to speak with you. We've been talking to the Grammy Award winning violinist Jennifer KOH. Congratulations once again, and thank you for your time today.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.